Hey everybody. So what we got here is a 160 hectare dairy farm in the Waikato region of New Zealand. We're at about 1220 mil of rainfall a year. If you want to get a bit of a sense of the surrounding geography, the farm is located here and it is just northeast of this extinct volcano. So the sort of overall landform is not sort of your typical main ridge form. It sort of tends to basically almost terrace downwards, going down this way and this way towards the main river. So it's volcanic soils. If you want to get a look at some of the details around here for this area, feel free to pause the video here and take a quick look. But the key features are rainfall, increasing droughts, making things a bit hard relative to this area, and volcanic soils, which also have some alluvial deposits in them as well, but it's mostly an ash soil. So reasonably free draining and also reasonably fertile, but currently compacted and not in great state, so it's not holding water. So the context for this particular client is that their primary focus is on increasing their drought resilience. So the work that we are already undertaking and is going to be the main focus, the first place we start essentially is going to be on soil, pasture diversity and their grazing management, because that's obviously where we're going to get the biggest wins with the least amount of cost and effort potentially. So that being said, however, we have agreed that in this initial scoping and concept planning stage, we are going to be looking at least proposing and identifying some potential water storage in the landscape as part of the brief. So the point here is to just sort of propose those potential sites, identify them, whether that be for dams, tanks, water channels, etc., for later consideration, and then of course further due diligence, both regulatory and geotechnical. So you can see here we've done some drone mapping to get some contours. These are the 1 meter contours. We also have some 50 centimeter contours as well. The accuracy is of course reasonable. It's not amazing, but it's good enough hopefully to get us through this stage anyway. The one of the key things, you'll see this white dotted line along here, that's actually the kind of division between this farm's two catchment zones. So this southern section here actually drains off the property down this way and off to a different creek compared to the northern side of this line, where it actually, the whole farm of that area drains off this way to the sort of middle of the north of the farm. So what we've tried to do here is, first of all, I've identified the essentially the gully forms. So in a high rainfall event, this is where the water is going to meet up and flow off. The approach at this point for me was to try and identify some potential water storage spots, whether they be small dams or whatever. And the first thing I've been trying to do is say, okay, well, let's find the highest spots in the landscape to give us the best chance at gravity feeding water. So on this property, the two highest spots are actually here in the southwest, and then just over here near this catchment divider line. So this is at about 150 meters, both of those two spots roughly. And so in here, let me turn off these contour lines for a second. And here are the potential water storage areas that I've identified. So this one is probably the highest one that I've managed to find on the property, and this is actually, well, you can't see it very well from this drone imagery because of the trees. This is actually a pretty steep-sided area, gully planted up with radiata pine, which is about to come down. It's at maturity. And so in here, you wouldn't need to do very much to just block it off, put in a culvert or something similar, and it would fill up with water. And then you could probably do that at several spots all the way down here. Now, the advantage, of course, of doing that is that we could bring water into it from maybe at the bottom of these hills or something like that, these little slopes, and collect to supplement that catchment, because it by itself, it does not have a very good catchment at all, just this little basin here. So that's one possibility, but then of course we then have the option of being able to gravity feed that to a relatively large area, should we want to. The other interesting thing I thought was that if we sort of follow this contour roughly, it's not super accurate, but roughly we can kind of get an idea that it's coming around here and then could possibly connect in some way to these two existing little dams. This in fact is one where it's an existing water body, and when they redid the race here, let's say bring the cows up, they put in a couple of culvert pipes and they happened to put them in a bit high, and this actually backfilled up a pretty reasonable area. So even this being volcanic soils, it does appear to hold moisture reasonably well, as also evidenced by these restored wetlands down here. Some of that may be deposition from clay particles and other things that are washing down and increasing the clay content, but yeah, that's it's definitely an option. The other thing that was interesting was that we have a line that more or less runs, I don't know if you can see that, but that could connect up in some potentially useful way these dams here, and then possibly these dams up here. Probably the next highest one in the landscape would be this spot here. And you might notice that what I've done is I've identified these areas which are already kind of eroded, the heads of these sort of eroding gullies, which are all planned to be revegetated. And they've actually done a fair bit of work already on that, you can see over here. So, but they need more money and time to be able to do the rest of them. But one of the things that we want to sort of do is identify how we might be able to take advantage of these areas where the water's already collecting, but of course just slow it down and hold it up higher in the landscape somewhere useful. The other thing probably to mention is that while this at the moment we're considering as a kind of backup for irrigating pasture should things get tough, there is also the desire to increase tree planting and tree cropping. They've got a small avocado orchard which they're expanding at the moment. So, and we're also in talks about how we might include some sort of more agroforestry elements into this property, which would of course benefit from being able to help get trees established by having a water source. At the moment, stock water is provided from springs, but I think it would be better if we could ensure that we've got some rainfall to supply that. So apart from being high in the landscape, the next criteria that I'm considering is, of course, the proximity to where the water needs to be used. So while number 1 over here, number 9 and sort of 13 and 19, these ones are higher in the landscape than the other ones, they are all on one side of the farm. So the proximity to where that water might be used is of course a factor. We've got gravity on our side to be able to feed it, in which case some water conservation channels, either to fill them or to be able to move water from them somewhere else would be really handy. But to supplement that, having some tanks such as number 5 here, number 8, and is that it? No, number 20 could also be useful, perhaps with windmills or just other pumps to take water out and make that available at relatively higher spots to then serve other areas. I was interested by the fact that there is this apparent contour line which seems to run quite close to several of these sites: 13, 19, 9, 10, 12, maybe 18. So the possibility of perhaps linking those up with something not too intrusive was interesting. Again, something to maybe look at a bit further on down the line, and would require a lot more due diligence, but nonetheless was interesting. Also, one of the reasons why I identified this site here as one to maybe look at, just because of its proximity to the center of the farm, where without that, everything else is kind of around the edges, and just requires more pumping infrastructure or whatever. So that was the thinking so far. If anyone's got any insights, thoughts, suggestions, it'd be great to hear them. Can only make it better.